The mayor has the power to freeze their rent. I am saying I'm going to do that for 4 years, and that's in stark contrast to the current mayor, Eric Adams, who's raised the rent by more than 12%.
So let's check in on the Democrats' affordability agenda, because as you know, they are repeatedly spamming this word going into the midterms. Hey, affordability this, affordability that. So I think it's important to define what Democrats actually mean when they say the word affordability, because that apparently translates to raising rent and housing prices to record levels while saying they were going to lower the cost of housing. And apparently on top of that, as you probably well know, part of their affordability agenda involves raising taxes, which seems pretty counterintuitive, but this is a promise you've heard over and over again: tax the rich. Well, that also apparently translates to, as a result of taxing the rich, losing $10 billion in tax revenue and literally going broke as a city because of your failed plan to raise taxes. In the end, you actually get paid significantly less taxes. And if you have not been able to figure it out yet, we are, of course, talking about the current financial situation over in New York City, where amidst his recent promise that you probably remember to freeze the rent, which is now being implemented after what was effectively a hostile takeover of the New York City Rent Board, Mamdani is now seeing an all-time record high median rent price over in New York City just weeks after he announced he was going to start freezing the rent. Now, if you understand anything basic about economics 101, this should not exactly be much of a surprise, because we know that rent control does not work. It literally just raises the price of rent and decreases the supply of available housing. And everywhere that has been tried, this has been implemented in South America, parts of Europe, every single time it is a disaster. Like, it is an objectively failed idea for very basic reasons. But of course, what many of these so-called progressives, aka socialists and communists, have been campaigning on is at its core sloppyism, right? This whole idea that, oh, well, you can't afford rent because of the landlords, or you can't afford rent because of whatever so-and-so, AI data centers or something. And, you know, it sounds flashy. Nobody really particularly likes landlords, but then you notice this is what it really translates to. And I think it's important to point that out, right? This whole concept of what we've called sloppyism is gaining a lot of traction in America. Between taxing the rich and rent control and stuff like this, right? The resentful or people who are struggling are looking for someone to blame. It's very important to explain to people why these ideas don't work. So with that in mind, I'd like to now discuss the current rent crisis that is unfolding over in New York City amidst Mamdani's affordable housing agenda, which is going clearly swimmingly, right? Record high rent prices within about 2 weeks of freezing the rent. Funny how that works. Let's talk about it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, let's of course start by breaking down Mamdani's promise to freeze the rent. I was honestly skeptical that he would manage to get this done, because it was the case, and the way it works in New York is they basically have this sort of like Federal Reserve style system, a board that controls the rent stabilization apartments. All right, they set the rent, and Mamdani was vowing, I'm going to freeze the rent. Now, obviously, the people on that board that were there when Mamdani was coming in strongly disagreed with this decision because it didn't make economic or market sense. So effectively, what Mamdani did through the first couple of months of his mayorship is he kind of did this hostile takeover, right? He forced and cooed out all the people on the rent board, implemented it with his own socialists and loyalists who would listen to him. And now, as of just about over 2 weeks ago, we just got the announcement, indeed, New York City is going to be following through with their promise to freeze the rent that Mamdani campaigned on.
The motion passes. A major victory for tenants as New York City's Rent Guidelines Board voted to freeze rents on nearly 1 million rent-stabilized apartments after months of debate and public hearings. Cheers echoed inside El Museo del Barrio from dozens of tenants who packed Thursday's board meeting. Landlord groups blasted the decision, arguing it will add to their financial burden and ultimately worsen the city's housing crisis.
It impacts me because now I have to make a real decision between how to pay my bills and maintain a 100-plus-year-old building with no money coming in.
Yep, so that is right. It is officially happening. Mamdani's indeed freezing the rent. And to be honest, I'm glad that he actually fulfilled this campaign promise because I want people to see the actual consequences of the things they vote for, right? Although at the same time, many are so mentally deficient that they'll still not notice or they'll just blame more landlords and more capitalism when their rent ends up going up. But still, regardless, that was the scene. So we have the leftists cheering, yay, rent control, housing is a human right, whatever that's supposed to mean, all this different stuff. But you noticed in contrast, a lot of the landlords are giving a rather fair warning, which is that this is going to be very bad for us. We're going to struggle, and therefore we're going to have a hard time maintaining the rent that we're giving out to tenants. And you might sit there and say, well, landlords suck anyway. You know, they're the man, they're the bad guy, they're the elites, therefore screw them. You know, the kids can run the store, basically. It's going to be like Animal Farm or something. But how does Animal Farm end, right? Because what they're warning you about is not just, oh, I'm not going to have my summer vacation this year. They're pointing out a completely actual economic reality of why rent control doesn't work. And if you don't believe us, let's just look at some of the current data and what's happening, right? At the same time, when New York City's implementing rent controls, rents in New York City hit an all-time high. Funny how that works. Isn't that so interesting? How's the socialism going, right? I thought this agenda was all about affordability and things like that. As you can see here. So in June, that's when the decision was finalized. But keep in mind, back from May, even late April, it was clear Mamdani was going to win this battle. So this news has been rumbling for a while. This was just making it official. He's been basically cooing out all of his detractors on the housing board since he got into office. So now in June, in the same exact month, coincidentally, where the rent freeze becomes finalized, take a listen to this. And again, so much for that affordability agenda, right? Rents in New York City have just hit an all-time high. Clap it up for Mamdani. Clap it up. Again, I repeat, when Democrats say affordability or affordable housing, this is what they actually mean. So just please understand that. The median market rate in June in Manhattan, folks, is $5,295 a month. That is an increase of 8.2% year over year, which is pretty insane. Rents in a lot of major cities in this country actually have come down in the past year, especially because, you know, COVID migration, population growth, some of the overinflation bubbles that certain real estate markets were dealing with, they're starting to level out. I think where I live, rent actually went down about 5% or so this year. Over there, though, right? Completely inverted reality, going up 8%. In Brooklyn, the average rent is now $4,300, which is an increase of 8.1%. And as the comptroller of New York City, a Mamdani ally by my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, but still, he says New York City's housing affordability crisis is at DEFCON 1. I wonder why that's the case. He further says we need to push harder on every front to address our housing shortage. Well, that's what's actually hilarious, is that guess what, buddy? When you freeze the rent, you're going to exacerbate the housing shortage. We'll explain that in a second, but first take a listen.
A new report confirms something many of us have felt. Housing prices just hit another record high in the city. Business Derek Waller's here now to break down the alarming new numbers, and they are alarming.
Yes, stunning new numbers, really, that we just got this weekend, and they are alarming. And I can tell you that the June median rents in Manhattan surged to numbers we've never seen before, and that is pushing up prices in the outer boroughs as well. now. A report from the real estate firm Corcoran showing median rent prices surging more than 8% year to year to just shy of $5,300 a month. Brooklyn also hitting a record at $4,350. Average rent prices in Rego Park up 12% year to year for a one-bedroom, according to real estate firm M&S.
Yeah, well, what a big surprise. And why is this happening? I suppose we have to explain basic economics to these people, but I'm more than willing to. This should honestly be something that's taught in high school or whatever, but I guess it's not. Okay, so let's break that down. Why does rent control not work? Well, in order to explain that, let's first just imagine your basic real estate market, a renter's market specifically, where you have these different landlords and they're in typical capitalist competition with each other, which is to say everybody's trying to find the right product at the right price. And basically they're competing with each other to say to potential tenants, hey, I have the best product because I'm the most price competitive, or this person says my apartment's much nicer. But it's sort of, again, typical market stuff, typical supply and demand going on there. Well, of course, when the government steps in and does whatever they want to call it, rent stabilization, rent freeze, but in the end, it is ultimately just rent control. And they basically say there's a ceiling on the price, right? You're not allowed to have your rent be above this price. That, of course, sounds nice to the sloppy list because it's like, oh, well, now the landlords can't raise the rent or something. But that also, first of all, let's point out, removes any competitive aspect to the market, which is why typically, if we're going to take that to our logical extreme and look at the way housing works in historically communist countries, you can say all you want that, oh, well, housing is a human right there, but they're living in complete squalor and they have no chance out. But okay, more specifically, though, the real reason why rent control doesn't work is because then for the landlords, the situation basically in many cases becomes unprofitable because they're not allowed to basically try to actually be competitive with their real estate. There's no point at trying to actually present a better product or renovate or do any of that stuff because we can't sell above the rent control anyway. We're basically stuck here. Everyone's flatlined. And what it creates is sort of, in a sense, at the beginning, it basically creates this stagnation where, yeah, there's not much competition going on. So the overall quality of the product under price control may be the first thing that slips. But that's not even the worst of it, right? Then, of course, what happens when, because of this government mandate, basically telling landlords you're not allowed to compete by the market, and the landlords either start to lose money or start to become significantly less profitable, is in the end, this is the real problem with rent control. The landlords no longer want to operate in New York City. And why would you, by the way? Why would you want to be a landlord in New York City or any blue place where you have rent controls going on, squatters, all this stuff, right? It's just too much liability. It's too much hassle. And in the end, it ultimately becomes unprofitable. Why is that relevant? Well, the socialists can just sit there and say, oh, well, screw the landlords. We want them to lose money. Okay. But then what are they going to do? They're just going to go out of business. They're going to say, all right, I'm not renting anymore because it's not profitable to rent out my place anymore. Maybe I'll sell the place off, right? Just cut my losses there. But who's going to want to buy it and become a landlord there? Who's going to want to rent it out? Because if it's not profitable to rent, and in many cases, if you're losing money renting out, why would you want to be a landlord? And so then what happens? There are effectively little to no more landlords left. And again, you can say, well, screw the landlords, but the whole reason you're a tenant, the whole reason you're a renter is because you can't afford to buy. So in the end, what does it actually create, right? And this is important to understand. A decrease in the supply of housing. There is a shortage of housing. Why? Because if it's not profitable for landlords to be able to invest in real estate anymore and rent out these places, what you're going to end up with likely is a bunch of just empty units, right? Because it's just too much hassle, it's too much headache, it causes you too many problems. People will know, they might sell it off, but who's going to want to buy and continue doing landlord work? So that's ultimately what you get. And so then, right, the Mamdani defenders might sit there and say, oh, well, this is not for all of New York City. It's just for the rent-stabilized apartments that fall under certain guidelines. And yes, that is true. Only rent-stabilized apartments are being frozen in their rent right now. But again, what does that create? So now because of this, you're going to have less rent-stabilized apartments because the landlords don't want to deal with the unprofitability of it. And then as you hear happening right now, what does that cause? You have the same supply of people. They're all in demand for the housing, but there's now a shortage of housing. Understanding supply and demand factors, what is now about to happen to the non-rent stabilized apartments, which in the end will be the only ones available, because again, the supply of rent stabilized apartments will have gone down so much. Well, the result of that is what? The price of housing goes up because there's significantly less housing available. Mark Levine, whatever his name is here, Mark Levine, who's talking about, oh, we need to build more housing. The city needs to invest in more housing. I repeat, that is a useless endeavor if you're freezing the rent, because good luck trying to get people to want to invest in new housing. Unless the city's going to own it themselves and we're actually going to have like just basically you're building actual projects, right? Like public housing in the middle of New York, which I guess is the point, right? That's sort of what they say when they say housing is a human right and people praise, let's say, like communist ghettos for saying, oh, well, at least that country gives housing to everybody. That's what they really mean, right? Sure, like everyone gets to live in squalor. So maybe that's actually the point. But if you're here to encourage actual nice apartments, right, any private development to go on, good luck doing that, because you've rent controlled and disincentivized as a result any private development from taking place. And this is not theoretical, what I'm bringing up. Again, everywhere that rent control has been tried, it is a complete disaster. Many times it actually raises the price of the rent, and where it doesn't, because the rent control is flattening that out, it creates a mass housing shortage, and as a result, a housing crisis. By the way, in places where rent control has been eliminated, like, for example, down in Argentina under Milei, we've actually seen, guess what? The price of housing has dropped significantly. And now the availability of housing goes way up. Why is that again? Because when you remove that constraint and people can actually then get into the landlord business because it's actually profitable, or better yet, build new housing because developers understand now we can make a profit because we don't have this rent control that's going to guarantee this whole project crashes and burns, then guess what? You have more housing, and because there is more of it, supply and demand, it becomes more affordable, right? So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully we can understand that. But this is just sort of an explanation, right, of why this stupid policy does not work. But I repeat, just understand when Democrats talk about affordability, this is what it really means, right? They'll talk about building affordable housing. And you might hear that and say, oh, you mean like an affordable housing for some 30-year-old who's looking to buy their first house, settle down or whatever? No, they're talking about Section 8, right? Sure, go live in the projects if you want. Not sure who wants to do that, but if we understand that this is the party of the third world and they celebrate trash and squalor and they import trash and squalor and they build trash and squalor, then just understand, right? That's what affordability is about. Affordability means raising taxes on working people so that they can expand the welfare state for grifters and foreigners who don't belong on it to begin with. So free healthcare for illegal aliens, right? That's literally what Democrats mean when they talk about affordability. And I repeat, this is not conjecture, because that's actually what they do when they take office. And you might sit there and say, well, how is that affordability? I guess in a certain sense, it is affordability for their constituents, right? I mean, if illegal aliens are who they're serving, yeah. Is it objectively actually true Democrats do help illegal aliens with affordability? Absolutely. Because illegal aliens don't have to pay for a whole lot of things. But if you're actually a working person, please understand that doesn't qualify for welfare. Please understand, right? The Democrat Party isn't talking to you when they mention the word affordability, and this is something important to point out. And you see every single time that their policies completely crash and burn when they are actually implemented. But again, I think it's important that we address this because, let's be completely honest, because the economy has struggled to pull out of COVID, which is definitely true. And because there's all these concerns about AI and what that's going to mean, and hiring's kind of slow right now, we have to be very vigilant, because these types of ideas, do understand, right? What we call sloppyism or the third world communism, whatever you want to call it, there's also, let's be honest, a reason why these people are winning, even if their ideas suck, because at a time when the economy's not doing well, people selling you this utopian vision probably sound good. Like, I can actually understand, for example, how Mamdani won in New York City. because you combine disaffected young people, often disaffected young transplants, with a bunch of, by the way, also just the mass foreign population that they imported into the city, right? That's the other half of the Democrat coalition. Then this stuff makes perfect sense, which is why we have to be very vigilant in defending against it, because these types of sloppulous third world style socialist communist ideas and policies we see time and time again. Look at Latin America especially, right? You want to talk about kind of the politics that the Democrats are starting to resemble. It's very important to note down there, right? That's especially a prime example of how this kind of stuff goes, right? This sort of like faux economic populism often completely destroys countries, right? 200%. Venezuela, prime example, but it's not the only example out of Latin America or other parts of especially the so-called developing world, right? Where, they run on this idea of the economic sloppyism, and then the country literally is just like screwed. Like it crashes and burns, it goes totally underwater, everybody's worse off. But once you got into that position, it's very hard to get yourself out. That's why, right? We have to be vigilant. That do understand. I will be completely honest. This type of politics is growing more popular in America, right? Because if we're at sort of this populist moment because people are sort of pissed off with maybe certain aspects of quality of life or the economy, justified or not, things like that, just understand, right? This is going to become more and more mainstream. So I think it's important that we try to nip this in the butt now as much as we can, because, the rest of the country is not far off for a reason. But last piece of news I'll bring you in terms of just the complete failures. Check this out as well. So Mamdani, of course, campaigned on what? Tax the rich. He vowed that we will pay for the free buses and all my Looney Tunes campaign promises because we're going to tax the rich. What did we say at the time too, by the way? This is another just basic thing about economics. Here's why raising taxes doesn't always increase tax revenue, even though that sounds counterintuitive. Why? Because guess what? When you raise taxes, you de-incentivize, especially if you're going to raise taxes on the rich, what are the rich people going to do? They're just going to try to relocate somewhere else because they're already incredibly taxed. They don't want to deal with that more. And so in the end, right, what have you actually done? Decrease tax revenue. And of course, the same goes for tax cuts. Oftentimes, Democrats sit there and say, oh, well, the tax cuts, you're just letting the rich people run away with money and all that. And what actually happens oftentimes as a result of tax cuts, this happened, by the way, both with the Trump tax cuts in the first Trump term and the Reagan tax cuts, is that tax revenue actually went up. And why is that, by the way? Because when you create more incentives to make more money, right? Because the progressive tax structure is not as harsh and basically, if I work harder, if I make more money this year, I'm not going to just lose it all in taxes. I can keep some for myself. Then what happens? Economic productivity goes up, investment, money, like work, all of those things increase. And then guess what happens as a result? Sometimes the government can raise more money. So just another example here, right? What happened after Mamdani said he was going to tax the rich? Even just said it. Has he actively taxed the rich yet? I don't exactly think so. But already, what is now happening? New York City plummeted. They lost $10 billion in tax revenue from last year. And why is that? Because a bunch of rich people left the city. Economic productivity went down, all of those things. And now, by the way, predict in the next year or so in California and New York, because of these wealth taxes that they're threatening, it's going to get even worse. You're going to lose even more tax revenue. So then what happens? You have these campaign promises that you have to fulfill, but now you can't because you don't have the money. Your stupid idea just created, you say tax the rich, even though the rich were already paying the majority of taxes. You try to tax them more. The rich just said, screw you. And then you said, haha, buy stupid, greedy billionaires. And then you don't have them left to tax. So inevitably, something has to give. You know what that means also every single time? Raising taxes on the middle class and the working class. Because if they're the only tax base left, because your primary tax base left the state because you wouldn't stop raising taxes on them, then in the end, that means ordinary working person, congratulations, you're now paying more in taxes. And if you sit there and say, wait a minute, Democrats promised me affordability, how is that fair? Well, don't worry, because your taxes are, of course, going to make life more affordable for EBT welfare grifters and illegal aliens because, hey, they need their free food. They need their food stamps. They need their free healthcare. They need their subsidized Section 8 public housing. And if you say again that but I was promised affordability, then you didn't understand the Democrats. You didn't understand who the Democrats were speaking to when they said the word affordability, because it wasn't you. It wasn't you. So let's properly define that. But yeah, glad to see, obviously, that I guess people are getting exactly what they voted for. And the consequences, exactly what we said these policies were going to cause, they are causing, because we only have to look to history. It's been done before. However, my concern on the flip side is that mentally deficient people won't learn, because that also does happen. So nonetheless, though, guys, there you have it. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.